So thank you, Mr. Loudon, for allowing me to meet with you one-on-one. So
Pleasure.
I had quite a contentious, different point of view. Now that I don't feel like I'm as under the gun as much. This is what I've understood about Ukraine and Russia. I can't stress this enough. You couldn't pay me to live in Russia. I don't care for the man. He's done some great stuff, certainly on the cultural front, but at great cost to personal liberty, natural law, etc. So I want to be very clear about that. What I heard about Zelensky, however, we have seen, this is what I heard, okay? The shutdown of political parties. We've seen, I mentioned the issue of monks being kicked out of their monasteries. The money, there's all this money that's going to Ukraine, and there's no audit, there's no accountability. We're not hearing any information about this. But the biggest thing goes to the Minsk Accords. What I understood was that there are the four regions that would have relative autonomy, but they would remain in Ukraine. And the Ukrainian government didn't keep their end of the bargain. And that's why that was the pretext for Putin and Russia to go in. Crimea was 90% Russian. It doesn't mean that every country's territorial integrity should be disregarded. But what my understanding was that Ukraine didn't keep their end of the bargain, and that's why Putin invaded. But of course, the best option is, even as Trump had said, let's stop the killing. Putin would never have dared to do anything if we had real leadership in the White House. Those are my initial contentions. Now go ahead and speak to that, please.
Okay. I'm talking about the Minsk Accords right up. The Minsk Accords were basically an agreement between Russia and Ukraine to have a ceasefire over the issue of the Donbass. The Donbass, there was a major Russian propaganda campaign for many years saying that the Russians in that area were being persecuted. Completely untrue. Well, 100% untrue. They put Marxist rebels in there to basically take over those places. They're both called People's Republics now. They have Soviet symbology in their flags. They're putting Lenin statues up. Russia violated the Minsk Accords from the first day. It wasn't Ukraine that violated them. Russia never did a ceasefire. They were shelling Ukrainian villages from the first day. It was never kept. But there's a more important agreement before that, and back in the famous the Accords. Look, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Ukraine had 1,200 Russian nuclear weapons on their soil. Bill Clinton forced the Ukrainians to give them all back to Russia on the rock-solid promise of American protection against Russian aggression, and the rock-solid promise by Russia to never, ever attack or invade any Ukrainian soil. Rock solid, signed, actual.
What was the name of that accord or that treaty?
It's the, not the Prague Accords, it might have been the Budapest, I can't remember, it was under Bill Clinton.
Okay.
But it's easy to look up. So regarding the persecution, the only political party, and this is why Tucker Carlson is such a disgrace, because he lied his teeth off about this. The only political party shut down in Ukraine was the Ukrainian Communist Party that was directly working and spying for Putin. The only monks' religious persecution in Ukraine was one monastery, a pro-Russian monastery, a bunch of monks who were hiring a Ukrainian government building, which they were thrown out of. They weren't shut down, they were thrown out of the Ukrainian government building a year into the war. Now, there is complete religious liberty in Ukraine. There is none in Russia. You have to belong to the Orthodox Church. If you are proselytizing outside of the Orthodox Church in Russia, if you're a Seventh-day Adventist, you're a Baptist, and you are caught proselytizing outside your church, you can go to jail for that.
That is, I absolutely am aware of that. That is true.
That is true. So
I absolutely agree with you.
So,
which is why my pretext was I'm not a Putin fan by any stretch. Okay, and you understand.
And I'll say the social changes that Putin is, the anti-gay stuff, the we are for Christian values, and we're all that is all aimed at Western conservatives and Christians. Okay. That is all to sell American Christians and conservatives that Putin's on my side. He hates George Soros. just like we hate George Soros.
Is that true, though, that he hates George Soros?
George Soros is his agent. George Soros.
So you're saying Soros works for Putin?
Look, I believe
What do you
George
mean?
Soros has always worked for the Soviet Union - Russia. He was a little Jewish. I can explain the background, but
You don't need to go into that because I'm aware. I need to go into this. You are asserting that Russia is still a communist state?
yeah. Look,
Okay, people are buying food. Rebel News went in, and they were spied on by the police. They had police officers harass them because it's not a free country. I'm not under any pretext that it is. People were buying and selling goods. It didn't look like. Now, are you telling me that's propaganda? It wasn't
No.
true, or-
When you say this, look,
explain.
Vietnam is a communist country, but Vietnam's got a freer market
So
than
is
we have.
so is China,
Yeah,
technically
so is
speaking.
China. But,
I see
they,
your
but
point.
they are because
Okay.
look, we got to understand that there are. It's when I say communist country, they are all working to the communist long-term program. They will have the free market operating when it suits them. Lenin had the new economic policy to save the Soviet Union in the early days of the revolution. It's classical Marxism. There are 5 stages of communist development. There is primitive communism, when you live in a cave and you go and kill a deer and you all share the meat. That's primitive communism. The second stage of human development, if you're a Marxist, is the rise of agriculture and feudalism, where you start to till plots of land, but people come and steal it from you, so local warlords set up power centers and protect the serfs in exchange for tribute. That was the system in Russia till the revolution. Feudalism. That was the system in China.
They had now, and I'm just to speed things up. They implemented aggressive collectivist policies like the Great Leap Forward, which was a great failure. It was
because it was trying to go from feudalism to socialism. They missed out the stage of capitalism.
So your contention is that what's happening in China, what's happening in Russia, is they're doing a flourishing free enterprise system to prepare for going into conflict.
It's to build up the economy, build up the armaments.
Okay.
This is classic Marxism.
I understand, but I don't. From what I'm reading,
But I've
hearing,
got
and
more
seeing.
evidence, yeah.
But I'm responding. I'm countering by saying I saw the videos. I've seen the people speaking. I've seen you have Russians speaking on anonymity. By the way, they're not broadcast, so they can speak their minds without fear of reprisal from the state. And they're saying that the communistic metrics in place in the 80s, the 70s, whatever, that's no longer in place. It is an authoritarian regime, not a communistic one. And it's the same thing for China. It's an authoritarian regime now.
No, it is communist. Okay, and I'll tell you what. Because
explain.
communists, they say they made a big mistake in China because they tried to go straight from feudalism to socialism and missed out capitalism.
Okay.
It caused huge collapse.
I see.
But in Luhansk and Donetsk now, they're putting up Lenin statues everywhere. The Russian tanks.
Oh, and I'm affirming your argument. Please forgive me. I saw a Fidel Castro statue put up in Moscow.
Yeah, exactly. But
Okay,
but
you're
here's-
right.
here's
You're
another-
helping me put it together.
Yeah,
Okay.
But here's another thing.
All right.
Vladimir Putin keynoted a conference in Sochi, Russia in October 2017 in Sochi, where they had the Winter Olympics.
Okay.
He organized it, he keynoted it, 30,000
I remember
young
that.
kids from all over the world, World Festival of Youth and Students. Look it up. It was to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, and all of the kids were young communists. And Putin keynoted it, organized it, and told these young kids, the future is yours, go for it. Look it up online. There's YouTubes of 30,000 kids treating him like a rock star.
And I'm adding, I'm putting other pieces together. I've spoken with Kazakhstan podcasters who approve, we fight a very aggressive social conservative program, MassResistance. And I was stunned because this Kazakh podcaster said, I want to go back to the days of the Soviet Union. And I said, we do not approve of that. It's adding fuel to it's building up your point, which is that there's a communistic, nationalism, but it's more complicated always. Hitler was a nationalist, but he wanted a global empire with Germany at the head of it, for example. And that's what Russia wants too, correct?
It is, but see, there's another complication. See,
sure.
The communists realized early on they had to get the US right on board, the European right. So they've got messages tailored for the libertarians, anti-war. This is how Ron Paul has been drawn into that, and Dennis Kucinich. They've got messages for the social conservatives. We'll stand against the gays. We'll stand against, George Soros. They've got messages for the Europeans. We'll help you against the Muslims. We'll stand against the Islamization. Orban is a big example of that. And so, but it was Putin that drove the Muslims into Europe, and it was Angela Merkel, the former leader of the East German Communist Youth, who let them into Germany. Angela Merkel is still a communist to this day, but she was the head of the Conservative Party in Germany.
The result of her policies are communistic, even if they put a different label on it, whether they call it Great Reset, whether they call it X, Y, and Z. And that has been something I've recognized. I'm not seeing Russia wanting to be a free Russia. I'm seeing people talk about globalism versus nationalism, but what I'm picking up on is no. It's a globalism where Russia's in charge.
Yeah.
It's a globalism where China's in charge.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Look, there was a World Youth Development Forum in Beijing in 2022, July 2022. World Youth Development Forum. It was all about envisaging Agenda 2030, the world globalism.
Yes.
The preparatory committee included Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. It was organised by the youth wing of the Chinese Communist Party.
Okay.
All the kids attending it were communists from all around the world, and the keynote speaker was Klaus Schwab. Globalism is communism. Klaus Schwab is an agent of China. He has talked about China being the ideal system for the future.
Same thing with Trudeau in Canada, etc. And Lula da Silva certainly.
Absolutely, Lula da Silva is a communist. The Workers' Party started as a coalition of communist parties.
Sure.
So what you've got the American right, who is disgusted at the social liberalism of the West, is disgusted.
And Ukraine, if I may be so bold, because they're.
Well, they see that, but I think Ukraine is no worse than Canada or.
Well, that's terrible, actually. My position, they want to normalize gay marriage. This is communistic too.
Well, yeah, but so does every country in Europe. So I don't regard them as any worse than any other country in Europe. In some ways a lot better. There are more religious people by far than most European countries. Their church-going rate is way above Russia's.
In Ukraine?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
6% of Russians go to church each week. Their abortion rate is 6 times that of the United States. Their drug and AIDS problems is way beyond the United States.
That is true. I know about that. You're absolutely right.
And they portray themselves as this Christian, wholesome country.
And they drank themselves to death. The health rates go down. That's absolutely right.
Which is why they have to bring Muslim troops in, because their own troops are so drunk half the time.
Okay.
And so look, any Trump supporter should know that President Trump and his supporters have been demonized beyond all words for the last 5 years. Trump supporters are fascist, they are Nazis, they are racist, they are horrible people. Trump said Mexicans were rapists. Trump said this, Trump's a criminal. 5 years of unrelenting communist propaganda against Trump. I would say contend exactly the second most slandered person in the world and the second most slandered group of people in the world behind Trump supporters and Trump is Zelensky and Ukrainians.
So there's the Azov regime that they
Azov battalion.
And the Nazi propaganda, the Nazi memorabilia connected to that. Would you speak to that, please?
Every country in Europe has Nazis. Russia has more Nazis than anybody. Alexander Dugin, who is a Nazi, is one of Trump's top advisors. He's the man whose daughter got killed in a car bomb a few months ago by mistake. They were aiming at him, but they.
I see.
Okay.
In the same way that we see a couple of neo-Nazis who say, "Oh, we love Trump, but we don't care," because that doesn't make Trump a Nazi, obviously.
Yeah. Look, the Azov battalion is 2,000 people, of which probably a dozen are Nazis. They take a
interesting.
Look, I could go into Georgia. And I could find a couple of Klansmen somewhere wearing their Klan T-shirts and take a photo of them walking past a Trump rally, and I could put a big propaganda campaign out there saying Georgians are Klansmen, Georgians, whatever. Every Trump supporter should understand propaganda.
That's what's
Because
happening.
you
You're
are
saying,
the
okay,
biggest victims of propaganda on the planet.
certainly.
Russia wanted to take Ukraine because Ukraine is the first step in taking all of Europe. So how do you neutralize American Christians and conservatives to allow the rape of a free nation in Europe by Muslim troops and communist troops? How do you get Americans to accept that? You have to tell them that this is an evil country, this is full of corruption and sex trafficking, that Zelensky's a Nazi, even though he's Jewish, that it's all about the Khazarian mafia, all these things. These are all Russian propaganda memes that have been pumped out since the invasion in 2014 to demonize the country in preparation for a takeover to neutralize the West. And
Wow. And so Russia today, you would say, is not a reputable source.
Russia today is well known as a tool of the Russian government.
Right. Okay.
100%. No,
Okay.
they wouldn't even deny that.
They're open about it, obviously.
Yeah, they are funded and completely controlled by the Russian government.
Okay, so let me put aside what I think of Ukraine or Russia. I'm going to make an argument from a basic isolationist perspective. This is, to me, if I were a congressman, this would be my argument, and then you can respond. We don't have the money. We have trillions of debt. Our border is not secure. We have seen, we saw what happened with Iraq. We see what happened with Vietnam. We have seen money after money going into this conflict. And I submit, and I agree with this perception by a number of forces, this is a conflict between Ukraine and Russia. If I were a congressman, I'd say we shouldn't be sending money. They need to figure this out, sue for a peace. If there's 4 little breakaway regions that are mostly Russian, fine. You go to Russia. This was even Kissinger's contention. Now, I mean, he's not the first person we should go to.
He's the last person we should ever go to.
But
yes.
But the bottom line is this: we can't be the police officer for the whole world.
Sure.
Would you not agree? I think you'd be offended if fellow Kiwis were expected to go to Ukraine or elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that's, I would say, putting aside globalism or nationalism, we have a finance issue. We're domestically collapsing.
Yeah.
Ukraine, I think, should be the last of our reasons for that.
Okay.
So if I were Congress, I'm saying this is my contention. You talk to me as a constituent, say we need to get out. We don't have time for this. We'll stop funding them. And I love your idea, the energy production, that would force a peace.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, that's right. And this war if Trump had been a parrot, it never would have happened.
I agree.
And if Biden had been a patriot, it never would have happened.
Okay.
But okay, here's the issue.
All right.
Medvedev has publicly said the goal of the war is to create a Eurasian superstate from Vladivostok in Siberia to Lisbon. Now that means NATO countries. That means America is morally obligated and legally obligated to step in. We also got to go back to the fact that America gave a commitment to Ukraine to give up their nuclear weapons in exchange for protection. I think that's a moral issue. I think that's a godly issue.
I'm going to say, and I would push back and say, and this is the really increasing contention here. Trump pointed out, and Tucker praised him for this. We're picking up the bill for Europe to protect themselves. That is wrong.
Well,
Europe needs to step up, and I don't think we should have a NATO. I'm going to be honest with you.
Okay, you can say that, but I'll tell you this. We know now from unclassified files, the Soviet Union was about to attack Europe in late 1983. They pulled back at the last moment. They were going to nuke West Germany, and they were going to send the Red Army through the hot nuclear mess, knowing many of them would die. But they thought they would get to Lisbon by the time they died. Seriously.
Okay.
Okay. So disregarding NATO, this is the whole. If this was Rwanda versus Burundi, I think none of us would be thinking about stepping in, But this is, if Ukraine goes, I will say 100% that Poland and the Baltic states will go next. And they've already been threatened with it. They all know, why is Finland joining NATO? Because they know they're next. Why does Sweden want to join NATO? Because they know they're next.
And they're a uniquely neutral country.
They've been neutral for 600 years.
Yeah.
Or something. Or 200 years. No, Switzerland's been neutral for that long. Switzerland wants to join NATO.
Okay.
Okay, because they are on the ground. They know this is not about Ukraine. I saw a great cartoon the other day. It was a big lake called Russia, and the plains below were called Europe, and the dam was Ukraine. The dam had cracks in it. Russia was about to overflow the dam and flood Europe. Their plan is to conquer all of Europe. This is why, because they are communists. They are working with China. You know, Putin delayed his invasion of Ukraine so Xi could finish the Olympics. You know, they are joined together in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Okay. So
the world's look. If I thought it was only two little countries fighting in Europe, I'd say fine. But this is the whole world balance of power at stake.
okay, so because because I mean this sounds callous, but you know we've been United States has bled and dry. Again, we have so many problems here that are being unaddressed, and all these billions of dollars going to Ukraine. This is where people are coming from, and I think that's a healthy contention.
Look, I can understand, but if look, there's two ways of looking, and from the point of view, I understand the arguments of Marjorie Taylor Greene. I absolutely understand them, but they don't quite see the full picture, because we have got 42 million Ukrainians who are going to put down Vladimir Putin if we give them enough weapons to fight with. Not one American has to die. They're willing to do it. Yes, it'll cost us some money, but I'll tell you what, if we think $100 billion is a big deal, you wait till we spend $30 trillion on World War III and lose it. You know, this is a bargain. This is a bargain. My ideal is this.
So you see this, you see Russian aggression similar to Nazi aggression?
100% worse. Look, they have threatened to take back Alaska. They have threatened to attack Japan. Japan's no threat to them. They have threatened to take East Germany. They have said they want to create a pan-Eurasian homeland from this is public knowledge, from Vladivostok to Lisbon.
Where have you seen it?
That was, Google it. Medvedev, Vladivostok to Lisbon,
pan-European. Okay. And the audience will do that too.
Yeah, they should.
And that's the way it should be.
Yeah,
all right.
They absolutely should. So if we look at the big picture, I say we've got this chance to stop World War III, because I believe the invasion of Ukraine was the first step in World War III. What was supposed to happen was the Ukraine was supposed to crumble. Russia would have been on the borders of NATO. They would have issued an ultimatum to NATO to disband or be nuked. They would have folded, America would have abandoned it, Russia would have taken Europe. Meanwhile, Iran would have attacked the Middle East, China, a rocket boy, would have attacked South Korea, and China would have attacked Taiwan, Hawaii, and the west coast of the Pacific.
I just would have to say that I am not diminishing that there's evil in the world, but my response is within Iran it's crumbling because of a Christian revival, which you've mentioned.
I agree. But
and the same thing is, so I just find that, with all due respect, I'm finding this rhetoric, and this is a healthy discussion. I was about to just email you because time was passing, but this needs to happen because it has to be face to face. There are always going to be these multiple threats, but we see a country with an economy that's so weak, like weaker than LA County. That was the constant trope from George Will when he would talk about Russia and when they're not drinking themselves to death. Yeah. And I think George Will, his stock has increased a little, even though his anti-Trump mania is despicable. But I think we're not going to change minds, but there's more to think about, which I appreciate.
We'll just put it this way. The best description of Russia was a gas station with nukes. A gas station with nukes.
I've heard that one.
They have got between 6 and 20,000 nukes right now. Mm-hmm. They have nukes that could destroy Texas. One nuke that could destroy Texas. Mm-hmm. They have them out there in the Atlantic right now. They could be firing down on New York within 20 minutes. They have a military base in Nicaragua that can fly nukes into America in 45 minutes. They're patrolling off our coasts. Their goal is to destroy this country. And I want to see, this is what I see. I see it in Reagan-esque terms. There's the evil empire out there, which is Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. There's the coalition of the good, which is a whole bunch of semi-socialist countries and countries in huge trouble, but with a spark of good and a Christian base. And I see, if we play this right, we will cause a collapse of Russia and a split of Russia into many countries. We'll see a collapse of the mullahs, and as you say, a Christian revival taking place there, a Christian revival, genuine Christian revival taking place in Russia, with real, not state-run KGB Orthodox Church, but genuine churches. You'll see a collapse of the CCP, and you'll see a collapse of the communist regime.
And that's happening now in China.
Well, it's
because
happening,
people
but-
are speaking up.
I know.
Because people have rebelled against the COVID, and and
absolutely.
the underground church is more popular. They couldn't diminish the fact that Jesus has tweeted more or Weiboed more than Mao Zedong. That happened 10 years ago.
That's exactly right.
See,
But
that
we
I think
have
is
to-
the answer, not
No,
the
yeah,
war
but,
aspect.
but look, all that goes away if Russia and China defeat the United States and destroy us. Then we have a world, 1,000 years of tyranny. We have North Korea over the whole world with American surveillance technology.
I got to ask this question because I know time is short. So you feel that Marjorie Taylor Greene, Ron Paul, these are good people?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a Ron Paul fan for decades.
You're a libertarian, correct?
Well,
you started
I
that
don't
part.
call myself that now because it's got so many anti-military connotations in this country. But I am.
Because that was the party you started in New Zealand.
Well, it was
or-
called the I was
Correct.
vice president, the ACT Party, which was a small L liberal party with a lot of libertarians, and I was part of the libertarian faction of that.
Okay. Why do you think? Okay, so how is it that Ron Paul and Marjorie Taylor Greene? Do you feel they're being duped, or do you
Yes.
think they just?
Yes.
So that would imply that they're not as smart, then, or then how do you explain that?
Look, Ron Paul, because he's very much America first. We shouldn't get involved in foreign, entanglements.
And that's kind of where my position
Yeah,
is
so-
at a
so-
general level.
Yeah, and I get that. And all that came about before the age of intercontinental nuclear weapons and bioweapons and mass anthrax and whatever. I don't think Thomas Jefferson would support quite that policy today. I think Thomas Jefferson would support NATO. I think Thomas Jefferson would support an alliance against evil, just like he fought the Barbary pirates.
True. That is absolutely true.
Yeah.
That was an international concourse.
Exactly.
So your contention would also, George Washington makes the argument we must be free of entangling alliances.
Because in
so you
those
suggest.
days,
Go ahead, please.
With those days, it was just one kingdom fighting another. There was no moral difference between them. They had these thoughts before the rise of the big ideologies, before the rise of Nazism, before the rise of communism. They never foresaw those things. In those days, it was the rule of the people versus the divine right of kings. And they didn't want to get involved in the king's wars. But now we have, and Reagan saw this, we have an evil empire which wants to dominate the world and a coalition of free nations, semi-free nations, who are the only thing standing between us and barbarism for decades, for hundreds of years. So I see things in those terms.
I see.
And I see 42 million Christian and Jewish Ukrainians being raped, mutilated and tortured by Muslim troops directed by communist generals. And I have no question about which side I'm on morally in that scenario.
This is like quite a different picture. It's a stark. I have to assert that, and I'm not sure to what extent, because I've given you my fundamental principles on a lot of these issues.
And I agree with 95% of what you say. The thing is, what we disagree on is the implications of this war. You would see it more as a local struggle.
Yes.
I see it more as the beginning of World War III, the chance to destroy the United States, to destroy freedom in the world, and to have an axis of evil running the world.
And-
I see it in
yeah.
those terms. So it depends on which terms you see it as to what your response would be. And from your terms, your response is very logical. I don't dispute the logic in your argument at all.
Yeah, and I just think, and we go back to square one, when you have real leadership that made it clear to Putin, you cross this line, we're going to blow up Moscow. And I believe it because he did it to ISIS. There was that clear leadership.
Yeah.
That's been the real problem. How people are arguing, why they're fighting, is all immaterial when there are clear consequences by a strong moral country to put a stop to it before it starts.
That's right. Look. 4 years of Trump, we had the most.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I got to share this too. The other thing that bothers me about this, thank you for your patience.
No problem.
This is part of what bothers me too, is how contentious it is, because just like with Al Qaeda, there's different Arab groups. I think they're all bad, and we shouldn't have anything to do with anybody.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's, riddle. It's just a quagmire upon a quagmire, and that's the other thing I see about Eastern Europe. You've got one faction against another, and there's all these bitter rivalries. I know about I think Holodomor, I think that was called
Holodomor. Yeah, in the 1930s,
wiping out
10 million people died.
18 million. I heard that number, more than the Holocaust that died in those starvations.
Yeah.
And that was the Soviet government. So the bitterness is so deep that they're intractable. And that's part of my contention too. I'm sorry to interrupt. Thank you for
You say, look, Ukraine never threatened Russia. NATO has never invaded any Russian territory. We know that Russia intended to invade NATO back in the 80s. We know that. That's a fact. But there's two arguments here. What is the scope of the war? Is it just to take back a couple of provinces, or is it to take all of Europe? Is Russia really just a dictatorial country, or is it communist? Is it in league with China to change the whole balance of power and dominate the world?
And it is in league with China. That's a fact.
Yeah.
It is totally. I agree with you.
Okay, so those are the two issues. If you believe, as I do, that they are neo-communist in league with China to flip the world balance of power, Ukraine assumes a whole new significance. If you believe that it is not just about Ukraine, but it is about the whole of Europe, that also changes the perspective. Because, we can say we can be isolationist in America, but look, if all of Europe goes communist or totalitarian, Latin America from Mexico to Argentina is controlled by almost all communist governments. We've got a socialist to the north of us. China would dominate the whole Pacific. How do we survive when we're the only one standing? When we have communist nations above us and a communist nation below us, and we have Japan is basically taken over by China, Taiwan's taken over by China, Australia and New Zealand are out of the picture, all of Latin America's communist, and Europe is totalitarian. How does America survive at that point?
Wow. This has been really fruitful. I know it's a very contentious discussion, and your time I know is very precious. I cannot thank you enough, and thank you. You should have the last word. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I just want to say grateful for the opportunity. I understand my views are not, controversial to many people. I hope I put my case well, and I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to do so.
Excellent. Thank you so much.